Hello, good morning. I'm here with Etienne Gara, founder and artistic director and violinist of Delirium Musicum. And we're in the Soraya's rehearsal hall. I'm Thor Steingraber, executive artistic director of the Soraya. And we're going to talk about Treelogy today. That's 3 syllables, Treelogy. It's just like the word trilogy, but with tree at the beginning of it. People ask, so there you go. But thanks for joining us. There are more people who signed up to join us today, so we'll just let them in as we go. So Treelogy, which premieres at the Soraya February 23rd, which is 3 musical commissions, each one dedicated to one of the 3 tree species that were imperiled by, of course, all wildfires, but in particular the 2020 wildfires, will be performed by Delirium Musicum and Etienne, as well as Billy Childs and his jazz trio will perform in Billy Childs' composition, and Steve Mackey will perform in his composition. And so we're here today to take a piece that might seem at face value a little bit unusual and convince you that, of course, it's not unusual at all. And then hopefully enlist your help in telling the story, because we think it's a very important musical piece, but also a very important piece of climate and California current events and ecology, et cetera. So thanks for being with us today. And I'm going to start with Etienne. Etienne, the genesis of this project, Treelogy, occurred while you were sleeping in a VW bus in the middle of the redwood forest. And you and I were having telephone calls when your cell service would allow it. That project was called Music Caravan. Will you just tell us briefly what Music Caravan is so people have context around Delirium Musicum's work outside of the concert hall?
Of course, well, during the pandemic, everybody knows that all kinds of concert venues were closed. And as musicians, we could not just stay home and do the streaming like everyone else, because Delirium Musicum is a lot of delirious musicians who don't do what they are told to do. So we had to go on the roads and play for people, especially in organic farms, wineries, anyone who was working to sustain society, basically, during those hard times. And we did that, of course, very carefully to not contaminate anyone. So we were sleeping in our VW bus, Boris, for about 6 months, traveling from the Mexican border up to the Canadian border and back down to LA. And that's when you called me.
So Etienne is our artist in residence at the Soraya last year and this year, and Music Caravan was the first project we did together, because you filmed all those concerts, and then we created a video series.
Yeah, 15 episodes.
15 episodes. And in the middle of that, of course, came the 2020 fires. By coincidence, I happened to be in Joshua Tree when one of those fires erupted, and seeing the desert catch on fire is a dramatic thing that I will not forget. And then in the middle of that, John Branch from the New York Times wrote a rather incredible piece about the 3 tree species, the giant sequoia, the redwood, and the Joshua tree, and how they're being impacted by the fires. And that was the day that I read that article was the day that I called Etienne and said, what if we do 3 pieces dedicated to each of the 3 tree species? It wasn't then yet called Treelogy, and that was the beginning of the process. The first task was to choose composers, and we made a rather long list of composers we were interested in working with. And we're really fortunate that the 3 composers who topped our list, 1, 2, and 3, all thought this was a good idea as well. They all have really strong California connections. That was important to us. And they all are both, they're all very different from each other, and also able to create what I hope will be a really cohesive evening. And we've just received all their compositions over the last few weeks, so we can now say that is true. But let me, before I invite 2 of them into the room, what else do you want to say about the early conception musically of Treelogy?
Well, as an homage, to these magnificent trees, iconic trees of California, it was very important to find the right people. And as you said very rightly, that the top 3 composers on our list are the 3 composers that accepted to work with us. And I think that's a sign when the stars align, it means that we're doing the right thing. And the 3 trees are from 3 completely different environments, right? Like you have the desert, you have the kind of higher altitude forest, and then you have the seashore that needs a mist that's happening with the temperature changes with the ocean. And the 3 composers are also very different one from the other. Is 3 completely different universes. Of course, you have Billy Childs with the jazz background. You have Steve Mackey, I think, with a very strong rock and roll background, and his electric guitar He's a composer I've been dreaming to perform with. It's like kind of something like a dream comes true finally. And Gabriela, with an acute sense of observation, and we're very close in age, and just everything that's, you'll talk about that more, I'm sure, but the sampling that she did in Joshua Tree of the different sounds, it's something that adds up to her capacity of creating atmospheres and sounds that you can see in some of her quartet compositions too. It's really brilliant.
That's a great description, Etienne, of their work. And of course, both Stephen and Gabriela had new pieces at Walt Disney Concert Hall last year. So some of their new compositions are a little bit ringing in our ears, although they will not be the same as what they're doing for us. But I do want to add one more thing, which is that I feel very strongly that we're in a moment where everyone has to engage in climate change issues, including artists and arts organizations. And I feel that there's nothing unusual about a composer writing something dedicated and ode to, inspired by nature. This has been going on for literally centuries. So there's nothing unusual about that. But what is unusual, I think, is that the arts are a little bit slow to take up the mantle on the environmental work in the contemporary sense, the climate change work. I think musicians, dancers, artists of all sorts have been taking up social justice issues for many decades. But this particular issue, I think, is a little bit newer to the concert hall. And even though it's in the context of writing music dedicated to or inspired by nature, I think this is in that sense, is raising our hand and saying we're willing to enter the fray on this important issue. So with that context, I'd like to invite into the room both Stephen Mackey, who's coming to us between classes at Yale University, where he's the head of music composition. And there he is. Hello, Stephen. And Gabriela.
It's Princeton University.
I mean, sorry, Princeton. I meant to say Princeton. Oh, that was terrible.
Yeah, but I'm actually not even at Princeton. I'm doing a little extra visit to the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia right now.
Oh, lovely, 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 lovely. Thanks. Sorry about that. And Gabriela Smith, who is actually on a wintry vacation in Norway. Hi, Gabriela. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
So I'm going to start because Etienne just concluded on atmospheric music in the desert and Gabriela's time spent in the Mojave Desert. If it's okay, I'd like to start there. And Gabriela, when you got this assignment, your first instinct was to go to the desert. Tell us about that and tell us what you did there.
Yes, I mean, I felt like I had to go to the desert because I'm from Northern California. So I've spent quite a bit of time around redwoods and sequoias, backpacking in the Sierra. But I really hadn't spent that much time around Joshua trees and in the deserts of California because I've just spent a little bit less time in Southern California. So I knew I had to really go there and become familiar with the ecosystems, really understand it. And so last year around this time, I had another concert in LA, and I used that as an opportunity to go camping in the Mojave National Preserve afterwards, which is, a lot of people aren't familiar with it because it's actually quite remote, and it's close to the Nevada border, and it's huge, and it feels very isolated in a really beautiful way. And it's quite large, and there's about 5 different ecosystems within this national park. And I went and explored all of them and brought my field recorder and recorded the sounds of myself both playing desert plants like instruments and the animals that I could hear, the wind, the site of the fire that was written about in the article that Thor mentioned is called the SEMA Dome. And I went there and hiked through it and experienced this really surreal apocalyptic landscape of burnt Joshua trees that are still standing, a lot of them, and but they're dead, and it's very strange looking. The bark is black, but then very white on the inside, and it's actually really beautiful, but in this very strange way. And I hiked through that landscape and went to a peak, and it was really windy, and I recorded the wind up there from hiding inside a little cave I found at the top. So it was just an extraordinary experience, and all of that, of course, went into the piece.
Amazing. And Stephen, when we reached out to you, you said, I think almost verbatim, I grew up under the redwood trees, and you were immediately drawn to that personal connection. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Northern California, a little bit more in the valley than the redwood trees, but I have a brother, two brothers actually, that were 15 and 10 years older than me, respectively. So, and they both lived in Arcata and Eureka, Humboldt County. And so from the time when they were out of the house when I was 3, and I would visit them and just, spent basically, weekend after weekend, month after month. And it was a great way to get away from my parents to be in Humboldt County. So they're home to me. The redwoods really are home. The way they feel, the way they smell, the way the air feels, all that stuff is home to me. I've been living on the East Coast for almost 40 years now. But when I get back to the North Coast, I feel like, yeah, this is home to me, and this is sort of the ideal of nature. I mean, just the beauty and the intimidation too. Just like it puts humans in their place. Being in the redwoods. So when offered the choice between 3 trees, it was, the redwoods are my people.
And how might some of that find its way into the composition?
Well, I mean, I think, several things were of interest to me about the redwoods. One, of course, is just the size, the height and the girth, and just the, I think, it's obvious that I'm not a poet, because putting things into words is hard. And so, the height and the girth of the redwood trees as a musical, was easy for me to musicalize. Also, the age. I mean, you think about some of these trees that are over 2,000 years old. They're older than, I'm a musical omnivore, so I know a lot of music from a lot of places and a lot of times. I don't know any music from 2,000 years ago. I mean, there's no record of that. So as far back as I can go is maybe 1,000 years. And the redwoods were middle-aged. Some of these trees were middle-aged back then. So just as a kind of inspired me, not that the redwoods would in Northern California would hear the music of the Notre Dame composers in the 11th century, but just to get a sense of a different sense of a lifespan. And so my piece tries to, in addition to the awe of the size, just the breadth of the time that they live in. I'm trying to, in 20 some minutes, capture a sense of a whole history. So there's that. Also, just the wonderful citizens that the redwood trees are, right? They share a root system. You can't be that big and live on your own, right? So they share a root system. They grow in circles. They call them fairy rings. So I love the idea of, fairy rings, which, fairies are a big part of my life with a young daughter. And fairies connote a more sort of delicate sensibility. And I just love the idea of these fairy rings being this infrastructure of root systems that support these 300-foot trees. So they communicate with the fairy rings, and they share nutrients, and they share information about which way the wind is blowing and the fog is coming and the sun is shining. So that is a very explicit. That was the first thing I wrote, which is actually the second half of the piece. The second part of the piece is called Fairy Rings, but the first thing I wrote had to do with me sending out signals to Delirium Musicum and having those signals shared around the fairy ring of our ensemble.
Incredible. Well, of course, you're fronting, if you will, you're playing electric guitar with the 17 musicians of Delirium Musicum. So you're not only writing for them, but you're writing for yourself as well, which you do frequently. And what you just described sounds like it's a lot of simpatico in the compositional aspects.
Yeah, I think Etienne and I are sort of, I mean, if this, I also wanted to write a really, great piece of music. It's not going to do anybody any good no matter what kind of, political, environmental statement I make in the score, if people don't go home having had an artistic impression, then it doesn't do any good. So I would say, just a purely musical way, there's a sense of a kind of a double concerto, or with Etienne and I as the two front persons. Yeah.
Incredible. And Gabriela, you don't have a soloist in front of your piece, except in a way, these recordings that you made in Mojave Desert become sort of the soloist, if you will. Say a little bit about how that becomes incorporated into your composition.
Yeah, I was thinking of them less as a soloist and more like an integrated part of the ensemble, really trying to integrate the sound world of the strings into the recordings as much as possible. So they are featured. There's 5 movements in mine. 3 of them have recordings and 3 don't. And one of the things I was trying to do with that is actually, so the first movement involves all these sort of percussive sounds of, you can kind of pluck the spines of cacti and it sounds like this cool percussion instrument. And there's also the seeds of Joshua trees that I was mailed from the Lou Harrison house where we did a residency in November. And I used those in the first movement. And then in the last movement, those sounds come back, but actually there's no field recordings in the last movement. It's all just the strings. And so it's sort of taken over by these strings, but it's mimicking these sounds that you hear in the field recordings earlier in the piece.
Incredible. You call yourself an environmentalist / composer, Gabriela. Can you just say a word about that and what that means?
Yeah. So I think the word environmentalist is tricky, but I think what I mean by that, really, I think everyone should be an environmentalist. Like we all, as Thor said, we all need to be involved in climate action. This is not something that only climate scientists and only environmentalists and only climate activists need to be working on. This is something that everyone needs to make an integral part of our lives. So I use the word very much in that way of wanting to invite everyone to be part of this really joyful thing. And I think that's one of the beautiful ways that music can be a part of this, is that it's really good at bringing people together. And none of us can do this alone. Individual action is quite ineffective compared to communal action. And I really hope that we can use music as one of the many tools that we should be using at our disposal to bring people together for communal action.
Terrific. I wish Billy were here today to talk as well. Billy's is in New York, where one of his pieces was just performed by the Isidore String Quartet, which I was able to hear the other day, which is really, really beautiful. But I know Billy shares both his background in California and his interest in the environmental action, but his composition is really so different than the ones that you just described. And I'm going to let Etienne speak on behalf of Billy.
Well, first I have to reflect on what both of them said just now, because it's exactly what's happening in the music. Steve, what you described about the trees being the people and having this connected root system is exactly how I imagine Delirium Musicum on stage with you performing your piece. Is exactly what I had in mind. And with Gabriela's piece, we're really part of the scenery. It's like imagine arriving to Joshua Tree National Park and you have the sun going up in the mountains and that kind of desert coming, opening in front of you. And that's exactly how the musicians integrate into that musical scenery. So it's exactly what they described with words that you will feel as you listen to those pieces. And Billy's piece, I mean, he has a very strong jazz background, but he was very eager to do something that is not just jazz, but, you know, music is one language with many dialects. And he wanted to make sure that everybody is speaking the same language and the dialects are not too far away. So it will be a communication, a conversation between his more jazz-oriented ensemble and the classically trained musicians of Delirium being completely in osmosis. I think it's going to be brilliant. And also the power of music here is that, especially with a subject that is as touchy or complex as climate issues, music is there to, instead of dividing based on opinions, we're here to unify with a common cause. And I think that's what's very important, because what Steve says very justly is to bring out the humanness in people. And music can really do that, to break the defenses of people or the fear of people, to bring them together, bring out that humanness that helps, I think, especially the youth. We're very overwhelmed with a lot of things that's happening these days, especially with coming out of the pandemic, which was, I think, very traumatic for many young people. And when you feel blue a little bit, then, and you can see the resilience of those trees, and that's that striving, almost thanks to the fires, when it's more controlled fires. And even though when the fire gets out of control, well, there are casualties, but they have that resilience to go through if we don't do completely stupid things as humans and destroy our planet. But I think that's setting an example through the music and the story of those trees for the future.
Incredible. All three of these pieces. Etienne is the only person who really has familiarity with all three of them right now, having received all three scores. The piece will premiere here, and then we'll travel to other CSU performance halls. There are 23 CSU, California State University campuses, the largest public education institution in the world. There are 23 campuses, 7 of which have performance halls. And after it leaves Cal State Northridge, we'll go to Sonoma, San Jose, and Chico, way in the north of California. Of course, Chico is right near where the Paradise Fires were a few years ago, so particularly poignant for them.
It's not lost on me that I will be joining Delirium Musicum, sucking up energy to play the electric guitar. But part of the kind of narrative of the piece is I am the bad guy, and sucking up energy and putting out pollution. So that's that is actually built into the piece. The other thing, I just want everybody to know that I didn't write myself an easy part. I've got a little, I've been practicing so hard. I've got a little tendonitis in my shoulder. So just so that you know, I don't just write hard music for other people. Give it to myself.
It's true that your piece is extremely physical for everybody. Yeah. There is a physicality to it on stage that is very engaging.
Well, and with the first question that was asked, about choreography, if there is ever a reboot, I feel like, dance is, for me, my kind of favorite recontextualization of music. I dance when I compose. That's how I understand what I'm doing. And we're going, and like you say, the piece is designed to be, to have our physical presence on stage. So we'll do a little jig.
That's incredible. Gabriella?
I agree with Steve about dance. And actually, I went to Joshua Tree with some friends of mine before a different LA concert that I had a few years ago. And we had an enormous amount of fun doing the Joshua Tree dance, which we invented, where we basically just pretended to be Joshua Trees, weird arms. So I'm in favor of this. Also, just thank you for making this happen. One of the things I'm most excited about in the project is the collaboration with Tree People. And actually getting our hands in the dirt, I hope. I've been volunteering on our ecosystem restoration in Seattle, where I live most of the time these days, and it's a really rewarding experience. And I would love to share that with more people.
Terrific.
Awesome.
All of the artists, Etienne, Stephen, Gabriella, Billy, are available for interview, and our team can help coordinate that if that's interesting to anybody. And we are so eager to see everybody. Well, I'll see everybody for rehearsals starting very soon, February 16th or 17th, something like that. And then seeing all of you in the concert hall on February 23rd. If for some reason that date doesn't work, come join us in San Jose, Sonoma, or Chico in the week following. I'll be joining the company on their concert tour. I look forward to that. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.